Morning, Force Management Nation. How y'all doing this morning? It's a great Friday morning here. Dogs are out in the neighborhood. So let's talk some planning, programming, budgeting, and execution, or commonly just termed PPBE. So before we get into really what PPBE is, just look at the scale of the Army. And these numbers are about 2 years old, 3 years old, excuse me. So the annual budget of the Army 3 years ago was 154 billion. It's about 10 billion more. That's if it was a country, it'd be in the top 25 of all the countries' annual budgets. So a lot of people for healthcare, a lot of equipment. I mean, just look at the amount of equipment we have compared to the inventories at Walmart and Ford. It's quite a bit. The number of employees, we're the second largest employer in the country. DoD is the first largest employer. We have a lot of land to manage, a lot of vehicles, and a lot of buildings. It's just over 50% of the size of Charlotte, North Carolina, just to put it in some context. So we have a huge budget and a lot of money to properly spend. And these are just some big areas I put together. That's quite a bit of a project to try and get as right as you can. And we can't. We just humanly can't get it right. But we're going to talk today about the process that we use to plan how much we need resources wise to get from Congress to manage all the things you see here, plus all the training and operations that we go through all year long. So here's our force management model, and what we're going to talk about today is PPBE. So let's see where we are in the model. We began with looking at the strategic requirements from the national security strategy, military strategy, defense strategy, the Army plan, what we need to be able to do. We developed those capabilities to fill any gaps within this module here. Within JSIDS, we started that process. Earlier, we talked about designing organizations. What does this organization need to look like that we're going to use to fill gaps, units? So we have a basic design. We developed a TOW or TDA. We did the total Army analysis that tells us what the Army is going to look like structure-wise by types of units 2 to 7 years in the future. And we're building material solutions. But we're going to pay for all of this. So while PPBE is not part of determined organizations, the piece we're going to talk about occurs at this point. So it's really separate, even though it's illustrated here. PPBE influences how much we buy for the material acquisition system and our authorizations for our units, what type of units we want, how many people we can man those with, and how much equipment we can fill shortages with. So here's PPBE that really covers everywhere. The planning piece is out here that tells us what we need to be able to do so that we can figure in here how we're going to do it, how much that's going to cost. And out here, we execute the spending of that money for our purposes yearly to get a ready force. So what the objectives of PPBE is to establish, justify, and acquire the physical manpower resources to accomplish our missions, to meet the defense strategy within a single year budget. By law and Constitution, we can only use money for 1 year. Certain monies can go a couple years. Construction can go 5 years. Acquisition money can go 2. But for the vast majority of our students, you only need to worry about a single year budget from 1 October to 30 September. But this is how we figure out what we need to be able to do. That's the planning piece. The programming and budget. The programming is determining how much that's going to cost to execute those missions within our Title X functions. Justify it to Congress to obtain the resources of people and money, because Congress gives us a designated end strength of people we can have. And we get those, and we execute the spending. We pay people. We buy new equipment. We get fuel at the fuel point. We move equipment to National Training Center. Those types of things. So execution is nothing more than spending your budget every year. So the Assistant Secretary of the Army, the Financial Management Comptroller, is overall responsible for PPB policy and oversight. They are the branch of the Secretariat staff that is in charge of the entire policy and oversight of all the phases. But let's get into the phases because certain phases have different people in charge of each phase. So within planning, which I mentioned before, is really determining the future requirements. Looking at the Army plan, the National Defense Strategy, the Defense Planning Guidance, the Army Concept Framework, the Army Operating Concept, COCOM plans, training exercises, you name it. What are all the things we have to be able to do? That is planning. And who logically would be in charge of planning in every unit? The G357. So they're in charge of making sure everybody in the Army understands what the requirement is for training and operations for the future. This phase ends every year with TAA. Now, planning is continuous. We all understand that. But every year you have to have a stopping point. And our stopping point is the results of TAA, which we talked about. That end result is the, say it, correct, RStruct. The RStruct is the document that we use that tells us what the Army structure is going to look like by unit, which by default includes number of people by grade and skill and amount of equipment for 2 years to 7 years in the future, because that covers the POM period. We'll talk about what that means. That covers our programming period. So from that we go into programming. So we take all those requirements we're going to have to do for training, readiness, operations, the amount of equipment, the people, and we determine how much that's going to cost. And then we prioritize that based on requirements, Army priorities, there's a lot of things. But then we put that into a program, and we call it programming. Every program, I'll talk about that later, programs are nothing more than activities. Think about your own. See, even Lux, my dog, our neighbor's dog, enjoys this topic. So programming is nothing more than, and that takes us into programming. Programming is nothing more than determining the cost of our programs. If you will think in terms of civilian terms, that is budgeting. You figure how much things are going to cost for the year, your electricity, your utilities, mortgage payments, car payments, saving for kids, education, vacations. In the civilian world, we call that budgeting. In the DoD, we call it programming, because budgeting is what we do with Congress. So you don't want to have the same term twice. Programming is developing our costs for activities within the Army. Things like recapitalization of aircraft. Division has a cost of how much it's going to cost to do training, readiness, and oversight of their units. Military pay. Big categories of things. And I have a little oak leaf because a lot of majors work in the Pentagon and in operational units on programming. How much is it going to cost for those units to do what they need in the future? And the G8 is responsible for the programming phase. They put out the guidance. They consolidate the requirements from all the units. Then we go to budgeting. Again, this is what we do with Congress. This scrutinizes the first year of the POM, which is the POM is our 5-year plan. And budgeting also includes defending this request before Congress. You'll see in April, May, sometimes in March, depending on when the budget's sent to Congress, the leaders, the chairman, all the service chiefs will go up to Congress and testify to the House and the Senate on their budget requirements for the upcoming fiscal year. And this phase is done by the Assistant Secretary of the Army, Financial Management and Comptroller, FMC. That's the Secretariat side. They deal with Congress for us. You have the execution phase, which is kind of broken into 2 different parts. You have program execution, that's looking at the ACOM level, AMC, ASCCs, how are they doing on spending money, and DA, they're looking at how programs are being managed, and unit level, who's actually ordering things and spending money. So that's where majors are, XOs, at units, brigade XOs, S4, people on staff who are watching and spending the money. So that's your planning, programming, budgeting, and execution phases described. This is kind of your one source slide that help explain really what PPBE is by phases and who's in charge and what's going on in each of those. And you can see where majors are executing on those. So let's look at the phases right quick. So planning. Planning is real simple. It looks near, mid, and far term, and those are the kind of the timelines we're looking at there. So all of our midterm requirements for all of our multi-domain requirements are in the 6 to 10 years. So this looks at everything we need to be able to do in the future from 2 years and out. And I'll explain why we're looking 2 years out here. So these are all the different types of things, and there are many more that kind of go into our funnel for planning. You've seen a lot of these terms: the global deployment of the force, planning guidance, chairman's program review, the R-Struct, the Army plan, that's the vision and the strategy, senior leader input, the operating concept. All this stuff kind of goes into this big funnel. And it looks at all these different things: the threat, technology developments, the strategic environment. Every year is always being looked at because things happen. And then out of this funnel every year pops the last 3 parts of the Army plan: the strategic planning guidance, the programming guidance, and the campaign plan. A new R-Struct is done for the following year. And the research development acquisition plan that tells us how much we're going to buy and what we're going to do research on for the future. This is always continuous in this whole planning phase. It doesn't stop, but we have to stop every year with the R-Struct so that we can begin figuring out how much things are going to cost. That's just your point in time. And planning, as we've said, is managed by the G357. And that's it on planning. Most everything you learned in this CGSC course up to now is planning. So let's look at programming. Programming, as I said, in the civilian world, you would use the term budgeting, but in DoD, you have to learn the new vocabulary. Program is where we take our plans and convert them into budget submissions. We collect up how much this is going to cost. Well, the major inputs are over at the commands in green there, and you see the little majors oak leaf where majors are working. That's where everybody looks at the future and says, here's what we need to be able to do. How much is it going to cost? I am going to send a unit to NTC in 2 years from Fort Hood. How much will that cost in 2 years? How much will the trans cost? How much will the fuel cost? Separation allowance, etc. How much is that going to cost? I'm going to have this structure of the Army from the R-Struct by grade and skill. Run the numbers per pay with an inflation increase. How much is military pay going to cost at that point? I'm going to buy X number of JLTVs in 5 years, and they have to be moved from the plant to these installations for fielding. How much is the TDY for the fielding team going to cost? How much is the rail going to cost from the plant to those bases that are going to receive JLTVs? You get the point of how much this is going to cost, or what the concept of things you're looking at. So those are the things. They look at the programming guidance memorandum that comes out of the Army plan. It gives you all of the factors to consider: inflation rates, how many things you're going to do. It's good guidance so everybody's on the same sheet of music with the same planning factors to go forward with for more consistency. Is it 100% right? No. It is, in my experience, it's a good 85% estimate of the planning factors for the future. But you do the same thing in your own home when you're planning. Hey, in 2 years, we're going to take the whole family to Disney for a vacation. How much is lodging going to cost? You look at the lodging today, you add 5% for inflation, and you got a figure. Okay, you're doing no different than the Army does. So this goes along the path for programming where it all is consolidated, and we look at priorities. We'll talk about priorities in our force integration class, what priority documents we use, what's important today, what's not important today, and there's only so much money and there are a lot of activities going on. So we look at our projected resources of what we think we can get from Congress. If we think we can get a 5% increase in our budget for next year, and I'm just using some easy math, then we project in a 5% increase to our budget request, and then we assume risk. So where can we assume risk on with all the priorities and different things? Some things by law we cannot cut. We have to fund 100%, such as military pay. That can't be cut. But other things we could assume risk. We could cut one NTC rotation, just as an example, for a brigade. That would save quite a bit of money. And then the output of this whole programming is what we call the POM. It's a 5-year plan. It's called Program Objective Memorandum. It is a memorandum that is the objective that we think we're going to spend for all of our programs. Really simple. It's 5 years. The first year is the budget estimation. That is the first year of the budget that is sent by the president to Congress. And that year is scrutinized throughout this whole process. I went through 4 of these cycles when I worked in the Pentagon for 2 different assignments there, and it is a very painful, very in-depth. They look at the program, the functionals for the different MDEPs and the different programs. Look at everything from how many computers will you be swapping out, how much TDY are you going to spend, what's the cost of consumable supplies. It is very, very in-depth. Now, granted, it's all an estimate, but they do look at a lot of estimation and synchronization and who's paying for what, and cross-talking between programs. So it's I have tons of confidence because I've worked in 4 of those. And is it 100% right? No. But the level of effort and pride that people put in to try and get the right estimate, and the amount of analysis the senior leaders in depth they get to with asking questions about cost, there's a lot of faith to be gained in the system when you see that, because there is a lot of stewardship that goes into the programming in the Pentagon. And you'll see the 3 big areas down here: manpower, readiness, and investments. Those are the 3 big areas of categories that 95% of the budget-ish are within those. And these are your programs down here. Your DoD appropriations are here. This is what Congress gives us in categories. So that's the Congress language. You learn more about this in the budget class that is in F109. Then you have major force programs, which is why we break these up between programs. The majority of your money is going to be in P2, general purpose forces. Not that you'll probably ever see that, but this is colors of money, both of these. Colors of Congress money, colors of DoD money, and of course the services. That is G8 led. We talked about that before. They're in charge of managing the program and providing oversight. So this POM, how does this thing work? There's single year budgets every year. The POM cycle is continuous every year. There are a couple going on in different stages all the time. And so let's see how does this kind of break out. So when we have this class, let me give you some time frame. I'm doing this video as if we're looking at it in October, which is when I'll be teaching this class for the first time. We'll be executing FY20. Hopefully something will be passed by Congress, either a resolution or a Appropriations Act. But let's assume we're executing 20. The Pentagon and DoD will be working on the president's budget for 21. Okay, and POM Cycle 22 is what we're working on today, collecting data for. The first year of that is the budget year. We talked about that. That will eventually become the president's budget year this time next year, and then we'll be executing it in 2 years. The other 4 years are the program years. Those are good estimates, just for the leadership to know, for the last 4 years of the POM. So you can see where there are spikes maybe in production, or there are projected dips in production because we're ending a program. So you get a good estimate of how much money you're going to need in the future. And that's just prudent. I mean, the farther out you go, the less accurate it's going to be. But again, you have those planning factors from the programming guidance. You have schedules from acquisition production lines. You have your training schedules. We know how many people are going to Atlantic Resolve, Korea, Spartan Shield, how many NTC rotations are going to be. We know how many people are going to the range just by how many people be in the Army and the STRAC requirements. So they're all pretty good estimates, but the farther out you go, there's less certainty because things are going to change. That is called the POM, those 5 years, 22 through 26. And then the years out are called the planning years. Those are not scrutinized and not really put a lot of pen to paper. Those are more ORSA numbers that you go out. What are production numbers going to be for acquisition? What are contracts going to look like that we know that are big picture contracts? What are manpower recruiting numbers going to look like? Just to kind of give an idea of big picture numbers. Nobody there is looking at how many laptops we're going to replace in a life cycle replacement every year. Now, what happens the following year? for POM 23-27? Well, the budget year for 22 is going to become the Pres-Bud year. As you see here, it comes right down this line. It comes the Pres-Bud year, and everything slides to the right. The new budget year will be 23. Program years will be 24 to 27, and everything slides right to the year. Okay, so let's talk about the MDEPs. MDEPs are basically the building block of programs. Each program has an MDEP. It's a standalone functional package, much like if you just want to consider it a savings account in your own personal life that you put all your money into just for saving. Or you put another MDEP or a savings account just for vacation, another saving account for kids' college fund, another saving account for mortgage payments, another saving account for utility bills. If you think of those different account numbers as MDEPs, it's the same concept. There are 514 of these last time I checked, and they're broken out between 5 program evaluation groups. And a PEG is nothing more than a board of supervisors, and I'll explain that to you in a minute. It is the people who are in charge of managing those accounts that are kind of grouped together. There are a lot of majors, lieutenant colonels, and civilians that manage these. They're called functionals. They work in the Pentagon and pretty much all the staff sections, and a lot of time is spent on the POM and money. Now, MDEPs are made up of these little small elements called Army program elements. My next slide will explain that to you, but they capture different aspects of the program. So MDEPs kind of make sense. MDEPs, if you look at it, 1st Cav Division, all division headquarters have an MDEP. All their operations and maintenance money goes in there, and they break it down between all their subordinate units. So it's just an account that used to capture all the expenses within that category for a program. All right. So here's your MDEP. So here's an MDEP for night vision. So the program looks at this. Well, he's got some force readiness support. He's got some small tactical optical, soldier maneuver sensors, and soldier night vision. And these are the APEs here. Okay, and then these are different ways to spend money. So within just the night vision, all these different little smaller program elements are part of night vision program. So operations and maintenance money will be spent in this program element. The OPA money, which is procurement, will be spent here, and some research development, testing and evaluation will be spent on these 2. But let's try to make it a little simpler, something you're a little more familiar with. Let's go to Disney World. There's a nice family down there at Disney. Now, there's grandma, grandpa, grandkids, all this kind of good stuff in there. So let's look at how a family would look at this. So when you try to figure out who's going to pay for this trip, there's you and your significant other. There's your sister who's also going. Yay. She and her family. The grandparents and the kids. So who's going to pay for what? These are different categories that you would look at, different program elements, right? Those are program elements. So who's going to pay for lodging? Who's going to pay for travel, food, tickets, souvenirs? This is kind of what you all agree to. So between your family and the grandparents, that's who's going to pay for lodging. And you get to put money into that one account. Whether in travel, the grandparents decide they're going to pay for everybody's travel. They're going to buy the food and they're going to buy all the tickets. But the kids, all the grandkids, are going to pay for their own souvenirs. So everybody puts their money in a pot, and this is how they all come out within the MDEP of family trip to Disney. So the MDEP is the program, the family vacation. The APE are all those different subcategories that are going to support that trip to Disney World. So hope that kind of makes sense for you. That's very broad strokes and very, very generic, but it gives you the general concept. So who are these PEGs that I mentioned, these board of supervisors, if you will? There are 5 of them, and they're listed here in green. And if you're really sharp, you look at those 5 categories, and you say, I've seen those before. And you think, I saw those before because those are train, man, equip, sustain, installations, which is stationing. Those are the different Title 10 functions, which is a great way to break them out. So all of the MDEPs, or the programs that relate to manning, are within the manning PEG. And within the Manning Peg, you have the assistant. They are co-chaired by, or the Manning Peg is, the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Manpower and Reserve Affairs, and the TRADOC Commander. TRADOC does a lot of recruiting, things like that, so that's why they got it. And these are recent changes. Chief Staff Milley said that it used to be the G1 as the co-chair, but he wanted the ACOM commanders who have to execute these things to be the chairs. So you see the G1 over here is still involved doing the day-to-day management and programming, but TRADOC is now, the 4-star is sitting on the peg as a co-chair. Think that makes sense to you. And they look at 72 different programs, and there are lots. If you want, you can get a list of those. You can go see some budget people. But those all of those involve manning. As a matter of fact, there used to be 6 different pegs, but they killed one 1.5 2 years ago, and took those MDEPs and moved them within the other functions here. So you look at training. Again, that's the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Manpower and Reserve Affairs, and FORSCOM, who's responsible for training. Wow, it's really genius how they figured this out. And the G3 is doing the day-to-day management of the work for the PEG. Equipping is Army Futures Command and ASALT, the developer of requirements, and the producer of the owner of the acquisition community. Sustainment is ASALT, that's the logistics, and Army Materiel Command. And installations is Assistant Secretary of the Army for installations, energy and environment, or environment and energy, doesn't really matter, and Army Materiel Command, because they now own Installation Management Command. And there's all the different, in pink are the day-to-day managers. But that's what they do. They take a look at these and they manage the day-to-day. They do the program execution. They work on submitting this and defending it to DoD for what we need. So it's really the board of directors or the supervisors to make sure that unit submissions are accurate, or as accurate as possible, and they are as fiscally steward and responsible as they can be. So how does this whole thing work? There's a lot of input for the POM through all these different actions here. All the requirements go to the PEGs. And you have these program integrators, which I forgot to mention on the last one, but I'll cover it now. National Guard, USAR, they get all their equipment, personnel, and everything except for the Guard. They get all their big equipment and things from Big Army. So they're not on any of these boards, but the G2 has requirements, right, for Intel training, Intel equipment, like the foundry and installations, foundry training site. Surgeon General has a lot of requirements for medical, and G6 for signal. They don't have any Title 10 requirements necessarily for these 5 pegs, but they all have members who are sitting in those PEG meetings, making sure that those equities of the Guard, reserves, and these other 3 are met or at least discussed with the PEG co-chairs, if that makes sense to you. So they are represented. Don't think they're left out. They just aren't to the level of these commanders on the Secretariat and the 4-star commanders, and nor they have the Title 10 responsibilities, which is why how they broke it out. So all of the pegs send their equipment through or collect up all the data from the organizations. They go through several meetings. You don't need to worry about all these. Just understand the meetings are out there and decisions are made. A lot of majors working in these and going to them. Finally, the big items go up to the Chief of Staff of the Army until it goes to the Secretary of the Army and Chief of Staff for final resourcing decisions. That's where they make the big decisions on big items. They're not looking at how many computers First Cav is swapping out on their life cycle programs for computers at Fort Hood. Don't care. That's 3 Corps Commanders' problem. They're looking at big things like should we cut 5,000 JLTVs from a program? Should we slow down? Where are we in the process of the 6 modernization priorities? So they're not looking at everything. They're looking at the big ticket, major priority decisions at this level. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a little process. And that whole process from collecting up the data from units in the G4, or excuse me, in the Army staff, until you get this senior leader from here all the way around to get that Secretary of the Army approval for what to submit, takes about 8 to 9 months. And it's very intense. And it's every year at the same time. So you get about a 3-month break, but you're working on other things. So how does this flow kind of work for us? Just so you get an idea of why it takes so long. So let's look at the budget that we're going to be spending and the money we're going to be spending starting 1 October. You know, if all goes well and the creek don't rise. 1 October of 19 for for fiscal year 20. So back in November of 15 to 16, total Army analysis was conducted for fiscal years 19 to 23. Okay. That then went out as an R-struct in October-ish of 16 through May of 17. The units in the field got to look at it. So this is what the Army is going to look like for 19 to 23. Then they started putting together their 5-year requirements, which would be the 20 budget estimate submission, or the first year of the 2024 POM. So everybody down at the unit levels and everybody everywhere is putting together what they're going to need for 3 years from now, or 2 years from now. But another TAA comes out, starts and comes out, and this one's for 2024. So that is going to influence these requirements, right? So this is going to influence what they originally planned. So they make a few adjustments. And in November to December, they're submitting their 5-year funding requirements, or quote, the POM, to Department of the Army. And there goes, all the information goes to the appropriate PEG. Any DAS items, Defense Acquisition System items, go to the EE PEG. That's the equipping PEG. Just to kind of link that back to class. Training requirements should go here. Manning requirements, any growth in manpower is going to go here. If we're going to build any new installations, new facilities, it would go to the II PEG. So all of those 5-year requirements are being sent up 2 years early before you start expending them, right? Because we won't spend this money for 20 until 1 October of 19, but we're sending it up October to November of 17. And you're thinking, well, I'm locked in. This is crazy. I can't change it. Yes, you can. It happens all the time. But because the process takes so long and everything is hinged, it's first Tuesday in February, President's budget submission. We have to backwards plan from there. That's why it takes this long. And again, remember that first slide of the class today. Look at the scale of the Army, how much we've got to cover and plan for. It takes a while. So everybody's submitting up their estimates for 2 years from now to the appropriate PEGs. A lot of majors working in all these PEGs. So from November of 17 to May of 18, the MDEP managers and the PEGs are consolidating, reviewing, taking briefs. This is that 8 month I just showed you on the last chart, the November to May. This is that whole 8 months here to get in to see all the generals, to have back briefs, to have the 06 meetings, to make decisions on what you can and can't do at certain levels. As an 06, I can make certain decisions from the MDEPs that were under my purview, the 7 MDEPs, but I had to go to the 1-star for other ones. I had to go up to the 3-star for other decisions. So all those are then consolidated. Whoop, bam, another TAA comes out. That's going to change things. There are now going to be units that move, units being activated, units being deactivated, units they're going to change, new equipment fieldings. All those are going to change. So that's going to influence what was just submitted. But again, our POM that we're really worried about is for 20, but so the influence of this TAA really looks at 21 to 25, so the out years that are not going to be annually scrutinized, which is the first year of the POM, the budget year. But you do want to have a good, accurate picture. And there's a process. It flows. It really works well, even though it sounds confusing. So in June or July of 18, everything is sent up to the G8, who do their consolidation of the POM. At the same time, the Air Force, Navy, and DOD are doing all of theirs. and those are then all submitted up to the joint. You see now, I forgot to explain the colors here. This is the planning piece, the gold. The programming is the blue. Budgeting is this lavender something. And then the green is execution. So now we get into the budgeting phase. So all of our 5-year POMs, this is where you get the senior leader approvals and everything's consolidated, retranslated to joint language by the ASOL. It goes up as part of the FIDEP, the Future Years Defense Program, which is nothing more than the DoD's POM. And other federal agents, federal departments are doing the same thing off to the side. So they look at it from August to November. And then it goes up to the Office of Management Budget for the Pres Bud from December to January. Plus you got the holidays in there, so that the president in early February can submit it to Congress for debate and approval to begin executing on 1 October. So there is a logical structure. There are logical reasons for all of these different timelines because it takes that long. Where are you going to cut time for the analysis to be looked at to scrutinize and make sure we're spending money on the right priorities, the right amount of money ish? I mean, granted, things change and priorities happen, and just facts of life happen. Just imagine we plan on doing a bunch of training exercises in Florida and a hurricane hits. You can't do them. I mean, it's just fact of life. But there's a logical reason for this. A lot of work goes into it to make sure we're good fiscal stewards of the taxpayers' dollars to meet our military objectives and tasks we've been given by Congress, the President, and the Joint Staff. This whole programming and budgeting time, this blue and purple, takes about 28 months. It takes over twice as long to plan and do it than it does to actually execute, because you're only going to execute for 1 year, but it takes 28 months to plan it and program it and get it defended for Congress. It is a very complex but functional, extremely functional process. But multiple cycles of this thing are going on at the same time. Let's just look here. For when we teach this class, we'll be just finishing execution of 19, 20 may still be at Congress. That's where this line is. We'll be executing a little bit. 21 will be collecting up in the building, and units will have and be preparing to submit at the end of this year their requirements for 22 to 26. I remember my bosses at the G4s in the Army when I was working on it. Hey, Jim, how much do we have in the POM for Army pre-post stocks? Great question, boss. Which one? The one we're spending now, the budget we're spending now, the POM that's up at Congress that they're debating on, or the one we're preparing to submit to the Joint Staff? Because I got 3 years I'm working here, 3 different cycles. So everything is impacted because it's a constant annual process, because we have an annual budget. So we constantly do this every year to make sure we're good stewards and put all this together to synchronize all the different programs for this huge, massive Army responsibility we have. So you have 3 different actions going on. Now, since 13, because of sequestration, a lot of the pegs will do a POM high and a low. So a high is what we actually need, and a low is if sequestration or budget cuts happen, what would we go back and ask for, and where would we make cuts? So in reality, instead of only 3 different ones, you have 6, because for 20, you would have a 20 high and a 20 low. So if you're a TJ from Myers-Briggs, a very organized, detail-oriented, systematic, organized person, you love this. If you're a feeler and a perceiver, you are miserable in this job. So let's talk about budgeting. It's the first year of the POM, which is also the budget year. It's well formulated. I've mentioned before. It's great scrutiny goes into it. A lot of eyes on this, a lot of questions, a lot of depth by the senior leaders, a lot of analysis is being done by the staff to present the best answer. It allows us to convert what we call programs into congressional appropriations, and it's our defending this to Congress. You can see this on the Hill March and C-SPAN, where the service chiefs and the COCOMs come in and say, here's what we're doing, here's what we need money on, and here's how much we need, and here's why. And the ASA FMNC is the lead for this phase of budgeting. There are certain key committees that we worry about talking to. You can see those, and it's that very much I'm a bill thing, if you remember Schoolhouse Rock. But there are two bills we really care about, the authorizations and the appropriations. The authorization bill is nothing more than the authority to establish or continue a program. So for this example, the Army is authorized to purchase the JLTV for $1.5 billion, and those are just made up numbers. So you can do it. The appropriation bill is nothing more, it is the legal authority to spend or obligate U.S. Treasury funds. There's no money in any of this. But Congress says in the appropriations, you're authorized to spend up to $1.5 billion, but we're only going to give you $1.25 billion. So this is nothing more than your kids coming to mom and saying, hey, Mom, can I go to the movies? Yes, you can go to the movies. You have permission. Mom, can I have $10? Yes, you can have $10. You are authorized to get $10. Now go see your dad. You go to dad. Dad says, hey, can I have $10? I've got $8. Have fun. And he gives you $8. That's all you're appropriated. That's what you're given to spend. You can't spend more than what you're given. So that's the difference between authorization, which is permission, and appropriation is actually the money you're given to spend and what you can spend. And there are two offices that interact with Congress. OCLL deals with the authorizations, and at ASA FMNC, the Budget Liaison Office deals with the appropriations. It sounds kind of funny to have two different ones. One works for the R staff and one works for the Secretariat, but that prevents one organization from being overall responsible, and it's a check and balance issue, which is why we have two of them. One looking at each, both the authorization and one the appropriation. And budget execution is once these are both finally passed, because you have to have both of them, authorization and appropriation. President signs it, then we can start spending money. This is continuous all year. We'll talk more about this during our F108, our fiscal stewardship lesson. But everybody everywhere should be taking accurate steps to make sure we're spending the right amount of money, we're moving money that needs to be moved so that we can maximize our purchasing power. Internal management, they have mid-year reviews where they can look at how are any budget shortfalls, what risk, any new changes that have happened, and if there are, then certain realignments, which is within a program itself, or reprogramming, moving from one color of money to another, of funds can be done within leadership priorities. So they do look at this at mid-year and figure out where we're going to be. Fiscal year closeout, which is what majors have to worry about, is at unit levels especially. During the last month or two, you'll slow down and then stop spending unless it's approved by certain people to make sure that all money is spent at the right places, and you don't overspend, because you cannot write a check that your account can't clear. So you have to be real careful about that. And usually when you go into an assignment, it's in the summer, when you got 2 months to close out. So good luck. So here's our summary. We do have a single year budget cycle. It's conducted annually, but there are several of them going on at different times because we have different POMs that we're working. The completed programming and budgeting class, I got a spelling error there, is 28 months because of the process that we use to make sure that there's good scrutiny and good stewardship. 3 major controllers are big players there. We've talked about all those. So the POM is 5 years, it's budget, and then program years. The BEST is the one that goes up every year. MDEPs are the Army's accounting tool for programs, and those have APEs, Army Program Elements, to look at the different smaller aspects of an MDEP. Budgeting is justifying to Congress. 2 types of bills we have to have is authorization. It creates a program or continues it, and appropriations provides funding. And then once all this is done, use of PHMSA within the programming phase we determine, okay, this is how many people we're going to have, where we're going to accept risk. So that's when we'll look at things, and I did cover that earlier. This is where we look at things like, okay, we want to have per maneuver battalion. So we're required 2 on the tow. But because of budget constraints, we're only going to authorize 1. So we won't have that money. We'll move that money somewhere else due to budget constraints, or we just won't ask for the money. And then throughout the whole thing, there's a lot of professionalism, ethical standards, and then programming and execution are your main areas as a major to maintain our public trust, so that you ask for the right things, you don't over ask, and you spend properly. So that covers it. I know it's a little long, but this is a long and complicated topic. So I hope you got some out of it. All the best to you. Take care. We'll see you on the high ground. Kennedy out.